Travis Wayne Goodsell. A warning. This video contains disturbing content. Prior to the advent of World War II, Nazi Germany was locking up Jews in psychological hospital asylums. They weren't called hospitals. That was later designated here in the United States by an act signed by President John F. Kennedy in 1962 or 3 to do away with asylum treatment and to make it more humane. The Jews would then be tortured with human experimentations, including drugging. Psychiatrists are the drug pushers, but they would utilize different human experimentations of torture to try to convert them from being mentally ill. And it was a horrible atrocity that eventually was involved in the trials after World War II. But unfortunately, many of those psychologists and psychiatrists were given asylum in other countries so that they can work for those particular governments. And yes, the United States was one of them. And so during World War II, the Jews, or the Nazi Germans, escalated. And that's where the concentration camps come from, is that Jews are not human. They have mental disorders and therefore need to be rounded up like mice, like animals. And the human atrocities escalated by psychologists and even medical doctors who are supposed to have a Hippocratic oath to do no harm. Psychologists have no such Hippocratic oath. And the various tortures were horrific. And they were able to round up people, Jews and others, including those who were gay, because they allowed themselves to have an identity. Their identifications had a color-coded labeling system. For Jews, it was color-coded with the Jewish star, so that when the Gestapo or other Nazi German forces stopped to see your identification papers, they would see your identity, and they would see that you were gay. Yes, very much like the driver's license identifications, allowing you to identify yourself as something other than and passports, I understand, are also now allowing for this. I keep warning you guys of what's coming, and you do not listen. You are being led like sheep to the slaughter. Not just gays, LGBTQ, but all human beings are being led to the slaughter. That's why this is a disturbing content. And so during the time of Nazi Germany, there was a Mormon by the name of Stanley Smith Stevens. He was a psychologist. He was born and raised here in Utah, and then took his career field to Colorado. And during the World War II era, he developed a method of categorizing human behavior. He used the scientific dichotomous, non-dichotomous categorizations, which simply means that you have the identification of plant life, for example. You use the outward characteristics to categorize it in subcategories so that you can distinguish the different types of plants that there are. That's the scientific process. He used it to judge the outward appearance of human behavior. And yes, to claim that people are mentally ill. You've probably heard of being in a bubble or having a mental box by which you judge and such. That's where it comes from. Stanley Smith Stevens, Mormon. And you've probably seen all the different surveys and questions, even on Facebook, for the 2016 election, where they ask you if you want to find out which Disney princess you are. You answer their questions, and they're feeling-based, emotion-based. How do you feel about, and you get only 4 choices to select from. Those 4 choices place you in a category box, and that information was then sold eventually to Russia, of which they then use that information to target their misinformation campaign ads to get Americans to say, I'd rather be Russian than vote Democrat, for example. That was all Stanley Smith Stevens. And so notice you don't have much of a variety if you want to be a particular Disney princess. If you don't answer the questions right, you're not going to be her. I was Pocahontas, by the way. And so you can see what they thought of me, because they don't think highly of Native Indians, especially female Native Indians who speak their mind and are bold and brave. Well, they knew I'm a danger when Russia got my information. And so, I was not targeted as a result. And so it was my peers in my local ward here who were the ones that I recognized were being deceived and perpetuating the propaganda of Russia on that campaign. In 1971, Stanley Kubrick came out with A Clockwork Orange. Malcolm McDowell was a hooligan, pretty much the alpha male of a gang of thugs who would go around the English community neighborhood, terrorizing the people, causing violence and destruction of property, and even rape, committing crimes and thefts and all sorts of stuff. A real bad guy, a nuisance to society. And so when he was arrested by the police, and you need to understand, when I was on my first date ever, Cynthia Pollard, she preferred to be called Cindy at that time, she, in our conversation, said that her favorite movie was A Clockwork Orange. I haven't seen it. It's rated R. I'm not able to get my parents. And I might have been, yeah, I was in my senior year, but it was for prom, so I don't think I was 18 yet, but you could rent movies on your own at 17. And so I had my own membership at the video rental, and so I then would rent it afterward and find out what she meant by that was her favorite movie. But I'm still confused. I don't understand why. Because while locked up in jail, Malcolm McDowell is singled out by a psychologist who's doing human experimentations and wants to see if his human experimentations will work on such a horrific person like Malcolm McDowell. And this is where the concept of conversion therapy comes from, which was utilized in Utah by the church in their LDS family services upon those who were gay, to convert them to being morally straight, like the Boy Scouts thing, which was taken out eventually, but not when I was there in the Boy Scouts in Southern California. And so nobody knew that the church was doing this. That was done in secret. But what happens is that you get strapped to a chair, your eyelids are forced open, so that you are forced to watch gruesome, horrible, awful scenes of human behavior. For gay conversion therapy, you're shown homosexual behavior. And at the same time that you're forced to watch this, you are electrocuted, so that your mind becomes conditioned to associate pain with the various images that they want to convert you from. And if you're religious, regardless of whether you're Mormon or another religion, you might recognize that. The Spanish Inquisition, for example, tortured people, mostly women, to force them a confession that Jesus is the Christ, whether it had to do with their being Christian or not. And so to the people, their forced confession is announced, and thus the church remains supreme, proving their case that the woman is actually a duck and therefore is a witch. As hilarious as Monty Python and the Holy Grail is, they're actually speaking from a place of truth in that video. And so, like I said, President Kennedy did his signing in the early 60s. And so you can see that in 1971, when Stanley Kubrick does the movie, it takes some time to make a movie. And so, yeah, this practice was done during the 60s, despite Kennedy making that, signing that act. And so it had to be done underground. It was criminal practice. You're not supposed to torture human beings, treat them like animals. But nonetheless, it was still happening even here in America. Stanley Kubrick's film taking place in England, Britain, and thus the practice was also there. By the 1980s, this is when the church was utilizing conversion therapy, and it had to be in secret so that nobody would know. But the church was coming out with their concern to the whole church, as my parents would confront me about wanting or liking females. And it was very uncomfortable to have your parents, who my dad didn't even teach me about, I didn't get sex ed from my dad. When my parents decided to give sex ed to all of us at the same time, my mom went into my sister's bedroom there in Placentia, California, and they shut the door, and my dad stood in the doorway as Todd and I stood and listened to him say, you're at the age now where you will wet the bed at night. I thought that was when we were young kids. He couldn't even say anything associated with it. And then he said, if you have any questions, just let me know. And he ran away back to his master bedroom and shut his door. My sisters came out from that and were shocked that Mom actually used the graphic wording. And was doing visuals for them. But, yeah, that's Mormon households for you. And so, as I'm now in high school, my parents were very concerned. And I thought it was just because of my uncle, my dad's brother, who had a Barbie doll wife, and she gave birth to Barbie doll girls, and 3 of them. And he decides he's now gay and abandons the family and moves out and shacks up with some other guy and becomes a manager of Blockbuster. And so my dad is freaking out and trying to rationalize with him of his Mormon responsibilities as a father in the household, and my uncle gave the excuse that he didn't like working on the farm with my dad and grandpa. He preferred staying at home with grandma, cooking and cleaning. How does that make you gay? Because that's what I heard all through high school. Well, the clothes you wear is gay. The song you like is gay. The sport extracurricular activity you do is gay. Everything was gay. And you see it in the Hollywood movies, where actors are saying, oh, that's gay, man. And so that perpetuates into the culture. Everybody is saying, oh, that's gay, that's gay. And it refers to something that's not reasonable or rational. even though it's not reasonable or rational to say that such a thing is not reasonable or rational. And I've told you guys about how I would watch commercials, and it was by psychologists, because psychologists have to do human experimentation in order to get their money for their lavish lifestyle. People aren't just customers of products, people are their products. And that's what makes psychology very deadly and criminally dangerous, is that they treat human beings as mere products for them to make money off of. And so the more clients they have, the more money they make. And they are able to justify their living by getting more people to be labeled as mentally ill. And so the first wave of commercials involved, if your son or daughter have these symptoms, they may be depressed. Give us a call today, we'll help them. And then the commercials would go away, and then the commercials would come back again. But this time, the same exact symptoms, outward behavioral signs. Now, you are gay. Come on in, we'll help them with electroshock therapy, by the way. I didn't tell you that part. Conversion therapy, which the results of conversion therapy, it doesn't work. People are only afraid of being electrocuted. That's the only result. No duh. And so thus people learn to lie so that they don't get electrocuted. Just like people who are arrested as terrorists and are tortured for a confession. Yeah, they say whatever you want them to say because they don't want to be tortured. And so those tactics by Bloody Gina and others in our government are worthless. It's for the sole purpose of torturing human beings. And there are those in Gitmo who have never had a trial to show that they were innocent the whole time. We're just assuming that our government wouldn't lie to us and lock up innocent people. And we all know that's not true. And so the movies in the 80s were anti-psychology. Terminator, for example. You have the psychologist who's brought in to evaluate Sarah Connor, and it's not until he actually sees the Terminator that he has to think twice, but he still has to keep his job and thus have clients. But he is totally humiliated throughout the series. Lethal Weapon. Martin Riggs feels responsible for the loss of his wife, who was murdered. That he couldn't be there to save her, or he wasn't able to save her in the incident. It's been a while. But he does contemplate suicide, but we see that he does not go through with it. He is able to talk himself out of it. Nonetheless, there's the police psychologist who he loves to torment and tease. As she's freaking out, insisting to the captain that he needs to come in for therapy. other movies, likewise, belittles the career field of psychology, and rightly so. But something happened because there was a shifting that took place, that psychologists were able to groom our government leaders so that they now were considered expert witnesses in court proceedings. And yeah, they're able to get permission as psychiatrists to be drug pushers. Here in Utah, they have the mental health court. Etc. Now the church, because of the conversion therapy that they were involved with and approving of, they were preaching at the pulpit that being gay was wrong, and forcing people to live the celestial law. This has been their position the whole time. They claim the 3 degrees of glory, but demand and insist that the only way the church can be celestial is if everyone else is forced to live the celestial law. Thus their push for religious freedom right now. And as you heard over conference, again, they want religious freedom to force the rest of the world to follow the celestial law so that they can have religious freedom. And so they fully approve of the Prop 8 controversy, that they violated the laws of voting so that they can try to get the Californian vote rigged to ban gay marriage. They tampered with the court cases in both Colorado and Southern California that involved wedding cake bakers who demanded that it's their religious freedom to deny people service if they don't adhere to their morality, their religious viewpoint, their religious freedom. And so we know exactly what the church is doing, but they think that they can fool people. This is mental manipulation. They say one thing, but in the underground are doing another. And you'll notice over the last several years that Elder Holland is now trying the psychological manipulation of claiming that there is mental disorders and that they need help by psychologists. And psychology did that switch, as they claimed if you were gay, you're mentally ill. That was all the thing with the 80s. You're gay, you're mentally ill. So we need to help you. And that switch no longer became a situation of you're mentally ill because you're gay. They now were placating people to say, we embrace your identity, we understand your pain of being bullied at school and not being accepted and being mistreated in the communities. Come on in, we'll talk about it. You'll be our client. You're still mentally ill in their mind. But now they've deceived you. They've been claiming that they can help you the whole time. But instead of converting you, they're now embracing you to keep you as a client. They've groomed you. This is what they've been doing to the masses. It's been a mass grooming to get you as a client. And yes, ex-Mormons, we have to talk about them. I know you want to cancel culture me. I hope that I set this up so that you can now listen. John DeLynn is a psychologist. He grooms people for a living. His target are Mormons who have a faith crisis. Specifically, his field is those who are gay. Just like regular psychologists do, that I just explained to you. He considers Mormons, even if you have a faith crisis, to be mentally ill. He will never tell you that. He uses the church as the cause for your mental illness. It is not science-based. What the church did is criminal. It's a hate crime. They need to be punished. But the church is getting away with their hate crimes. And psychologists don't counsel the police to lock up the haters. Instead, they need the clients, so they need the haters. They need the bullies to continue to exist, so that they can keep the clients. There were books that came out. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Mormon Stephen R. Covey. His book still remains in the minds of the people, even though nobody is using his book correctly. It's the win-win situation. People now use it to say, well, I've got an idea, and if you adhere to it, we both win. No, that's not how it works, guys. Nonetheless, the church seems to have shifted at that point and gone silent on their self-help book ban thing. Because 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is a self-help book. And it came after the time that the church was against self-help books, which were written by psychologists, as they were embracing psychologists only when it suited their purpose. But the church went silent after Stephen R. Covey's book, and especially when it became a bestseller. Then there was Who Moved My Cheese? This was by psychologists who were performing mice experimentation in mazes. They would torture the mice by grooming them to find their way through the maze to obtain the cheese. And once the mouse had established the route to take to get the cheese on a regular basis, they then would take the cheese away to confuse the mouse. And so they wrote a book on it for business owners to treat their employees. So you can see how psychiatrists treat people. They consider human beings as animals, and in this particular case as rodents. And they are grooming business owners to do the same thing. This is what's called self-fulfilling prophecy. But instead of the psychiatrist or psychologist self-fulfilling their own self-fulfilling prophecy, they get other people hypnotized, brainwashed, groomed to do it for them. And so guess who was also using that book at their company on 17th and 17th here in Utah? The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I was working in, I think I got transferred back to work in the returns department. Because I started off as an order processor on the pick lines back in the warehouse. And then I was abandoned by the first failed marriage. And passed up promotions and raises because I was too distraught. I didn't really care anymore. I don't care anymore. I don't care no more. And yes, music can be used to brainwash people. Not just the backmasking or playing the records backwards. To hear the devil's voice telling you to go to church and say your prayers. Billy and the Boingers. We're putting that in the description below. Let me write that down. Billy and Boingers. And in fact, I was so disgusted that Ross Perot bailed as a presidential candidate that I refused to cast a legitimate vote for my very first election when I turned 18 in 1988. Did I say 98 or was I 89? No sense in trying to find it. But yeah, that election I voted for Bellanopus because they were running for president. I was pissed that he could not endure the threats to his life and his family's life. To be a president, you have to be strong and stand up to bullies. You cannot cave at the first threat that comes your way. You hand it off to the FBI, you let them deal with it. And so, yeah, the church was grooming the upper management to treat us employees as rodents. And that infuriated me. And of course, Dick Ballard was infuriated back that I was exposing this and didn't want me to go to the lecture after I told him I wasn't going. It was as if that were some kind of a punishment for me to not be allowed to go to the grooming session. And so, yes, it was treated exactly like an AA meeting, as the Mormon God is the higher power. And so, yes, those are run by psychologists. And notice that they leave you in a situation where you still can choose to go drink more alcohol. They don't help you. You know, they give you a sponsor, and you're supposed to call them when you're tempted. And you're supposed to stay away from the bars and all those bad habits that got you into the drinking problem in the first place, but they need clients in order to maintain things. And AAs often get funded by court order or other such means. And so you can see how they aren't really helping people as much as there is the reward of a little dog treat of 1 year medals and so many medals on up. But that's what it is. It's like Pavlov's dog. But they don't. And it's sad. I even saw an episode of Simon and Simon where psychologists were purposely pulling drunks off the street, homeless drunks off the street, putting them into their human experimentation thing, and would eventually murder them because they can't have witnesses to what they're doing. But yeah, this is a real serious problem that is not being addressed because the majority of the world is brainwashed. They've been groomed. And so, I cringe when I watch John Dehlin when he's shown up on my YouTube feed. And I did the video warning when I saw that he had groomed his co-worker. Just from the thumbnail alone. Leaned. Everybody knows what that means because we all saw While You Were Sleeping with Sandra Bullock. Leaned. And so the church purposely uses all these psychological grooming techniques to give you the straw man Jesus so that you will fear and even love so that you obey, depending. The church will go back and forth. You must fear God and you must love God and thus obey. They use both tactics. And it's a straw man. What they're actually saying is that we have to obey the prophets. But they claim it's God. The prophets are claiming to be God. But we get deceived into thinking, oh yeah, I must obey God, so I must obey the prophets. And that's what they did in the temple endowment about the law of obedience. Women were to obey their husband. Now they obey God. God doesn't exist, not the Jesus God of Constantine. The big lie of all lies for 2,000 years that has infiltrated Islam and infiltrated the Jews even. With the single God that is believed to be plural. And so even the church, by claiming Jesus, has fallen into that. But again, they were of the concept that Jesus is Hercules or Perseus, being born of Heavenly Father and immortal woman, and thus separated, not Trinity, but still not real. They turned Joseph Smith into a Christian. And they've got all of us believing it as we are born and raised groomed. That Joseph Smith saw Heavenly Father and Jesus. But when you actually go to the text, Doesn't call him by name, only by description. The sun at noonday. And you're supposed to do your research on the language of the Egyptians to know that the sun at noonday of the Egyptians is Amen. And so when you hear Adam Ondai Amen, yeah, that's the name. And where does that come from? Isaiah. He shall be called Emmanuel, the God Amen. Not God with us, the God Amen of the Egyptians, the sun at noonday. And he's a mortal man with mortal parents, because that's how the pharaohs were perceived. That's how kings were perceived. King David, he was a Christ. Moses, a Christ. They're all Christs. That concept was lost with Constantine. Oh, there's only one. There are no other Christs. Because they don't say king, unless they actually specifically say King of Kings. But even in saying that, people are supposed to say, oh, so other kings are Christs too. But we don't, because of Constantine, that has groomed the world for 2,000 years. And so when you listen to the prophets, as they talk about how people with mental illnesses need help, but then also say that Jesus will help, I have seen how people get confused, because they go back and forth. You have people who think that they can just go off of the drugging that they've been on for decades, go cold turkey, because Jesus will help them. And of course they go through withdrawal symptoms, and the drugs that are used by psychiatrists are very dangerous. The lifespan of a person who's deemed mentally ill drops considerably once they start on drug therapy. They are literally torturing and murdering people. They are dying before their actual normal time. And like I said, they need clients in order to have their lavish lifestyle. If they were to cure anybody, which they don't claim to cure, because they don't actually diagnose, they don't identify an actual cause in your brain. Because if they did, oh, we don't need a psychologist, we now have to go to a medical doctor because there's an actual cause in the brain. You know, for like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, there's an actual cause in the brain. And so a person with Alzheimer's or Parkinson's must go to a medical doctor, like a neurologist or a specialist of some kind for brain disorders. But psychologists, there's nothing. It's all made up. It's a straw man business. They bully you into saying you're mentally ill, and you must accept it because you're in denial if you don't. And you see this being played out in our nation, not just with LGBTQ, not just with male and female relationships, like the self-help book, women are from Venus, men are from Mars. Yeah, it's all crap. They tried to groom you to say, yes, I am from Venus, and I must behave this way. They tell you how to act, how to think, how to believe, and what to say. That's brainwashing. They've groomed you. That's why all those self-help books were actually dangerous. Psychologists are in the business of telling you who to be, who to claim as your identity, because they need clients. So as little kids, we watch a Disney movie and go, oh, that's cute, I want to be a fish. I want to be a dragon. I want to be that cute redhead, even though I'm male. I want to be a robot. Psychologists say, great, you be you. Whereas parents go, it's just a phase, they'll grow out of it. And you are getting your identity put on driver's licenses and now on passports, as laws by bullies are tormenting you and causing you distress, emotional pain, so that you go to a psychologist, so that they say it's okay to be you. And it's not just for LGBTQIAPO plus and whatever non-binary is. It's also for women, victims of rape. It's also for kids at school shootings. It's also for political party persons. Oh, your candidate lost because of a rigged election? Oh, come on in, we'll talk about it. You know, certainly he'll change once he's president. He doesn't actually mean what he says. He certainly won't cross this line again. Yes, even the news, both conservative and liberal, are grooming their audiences. We're now finding out that the liberal media downplayed Hunter Biden, purposely left out information. And I got that from a non-conservative source. MSNBC is now going, oh no, there was stuff we didn't talk about Hunter Biden. We're all getting groomed. And so Nelson coming out and saying that the Ukraine war, there are good people on both sides. Bucha, oh my God. Oh my God. What we saw was that they could not take the capital. They committed horrible atrocities and left. But Putin's not done. We should all fear they're leaving Kiev, the capital. The news is saying they've left. They're grooming us to think everything's fine now in Kiev, just distracting us with the atrocities that they left behind in Bucha. Something's coming. that they're purposely being pulled out for. There are Syrian mercenaries that are now involved. There is Belarus military that are now involved. Hungary keeps demonstrating their support for Putin. They're now willing to pay in rubles for gas. Just as previous, back in the beginning, they said, we're not allowing NATO or any of the allies to use our land to send through troops. And so you have this division that's already being set up. Remember, the church has purposely been distracting us. They are grooming. And so, yes, they come out and exposed as bigots, but they are distracting with the covenant path. What is the covenant path? It's the temple covenants. If as a Mormon you're still listening, it's the temple covenants. There are no other covenants that they're referring to. It's not the For Strength of the Youth pamphlet. So don't try to gaslight me. Stop gaslighting others. That's a psychological brainwashing. What is the law of chastity changed by Nelson? What does the law of obedience still refer to? What temple sealing ceremony does it connect with? What does Section 132 that Brigham Young used to replace the chapter on monogamy have to do with any of it? And how is it going to happen? Because it's still illegal in the United States of America. Well, I've gone over with you what they're planning, and they've destroyed me because I'm Pocahontas. I'm going to have to use that as the picture. And nobody's going to understand it. Well, I guess it was early in the video, wasn't it? So maybe people will figure it out. The church paid Putin by announcing a temple in Russia. That means they gave Russia money. We don't have a temple in Russia. They took our money. What's it being used for? The war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine. Ezekiel chapter 38. This is the war. Nelson downplayed it, saying, well, it was prophesied wars and rumors of wars. No, Nelson, this is the war. The Pope is on a campaign to placate his God, apologizing for everything. I saw the news article. He apologizes with the Ukrainian flag. What's next? He's apologized in Canada. So yeah, he knows what this means. Not just from the Sisters of Fatima. Because nukes are coming. The day that shall burn as an oven. And Putin has withdrawn his troops from Kiev, the capital. They've pulled back out of Chernobyl after conquering it. The day that shall burn as an oven. They paid for it. They paid for nukes. Why? Because when the world governments collapse from the nuclear holocaust that Bruce R. McConkie says must come, the church can then practice polygamy. And all the men died in war. So you've got all these women, even underage women, who need their reproach taken away. Need to be cared for. And so Handmaid's Tale grooming begins. This is what you don't see. Whereas you are shocked by, oh no, Oaks did it again, establishing the church as bigots. They know all about psychology. They know how to groom. They know how to use psychologists to their advantage. And all of you need to be concerned. Because now that you've been identified, they'll be able to lock you up and torture you, resume conversion therapy, so to speak. You'll never be leaving. It'll be an indefinite incarceration. And when they're through with you, they will gas you. If you will not be their slave, to make their lifestyles lavish, if you are not a woman for them to rebuild the human race from, please listen, guys. It's coming. Just the fact that they fooled you into thinking Joseph Smith is a Christian should be concern for every Mormon.